Shit. Dog poop. Hey there, it's finally spring. TJ from Canadian Product Reviews, and I thought my wife wants to pull the baby in a little trailer. We got one. Here's a Walmart special, if I've ever seen one. So I'm a super expert on bicycles. I've assembled them in several different environments, and I'm going to get to the basics on how you get a bicycle up and running for the summer. So cue the intro and we'll get right back to it. So here we are in the shop, and I got my bike all set up on this makeshift bike rack. I literally just made this with some hooks, some strapping. It's locked into my vise. It will definitely explode by the time this video is over. Cheap bikes. Let's go ahead and get them ready for summer. This thing looks like an absolute piece of shit. It's a Walmart bike. It's like, I don't know, 8 years old. But, you know, the fundamentals are here, and actually propping it up here and cleaning it up, I noticed everything's in actually really good shape. It just doesn't look good. All of the chrome and stuff is all rusting, and, you know, we got oxidizing metal, and I have overspray on it because I've painted so much shit in my garage with this bike just sitting there. But when you go over it, it's actually quite functional, and that's the idea here. We'll see if my wife gets some use out of it, but wheels and tires, lube, brakes, gears, and then a test ride and kind of repeat, because once you go on a test ride, you'll find out that even though you think the bike's in good shape, under load, you know, the gears are skipping or the brakes make a squeal or something like that. So always go out for a couple test runs. So real quick, wheels and tires. Tires are easy. They need to be inflated, and they need to be inflated more than just feels good. Buy a pump with the pressure gauge on it. And if you look on the side of the sidewall here, it says 40 to 65 PSI. That is a really big gap. Put at least the minimum in it, plus 5 pounds. That way, when 5 pounds leaks out after the temperature changes or something like that, it's still at 40 PSI. But that'll give you a nice comfortable ride. If you go up to 60, it's gonna be a lot harder. And like those shocks are doing anything. As far as wheels, well, grab the frame here. Make sure that you don't have any play in the wheels back and forth, and spin them. Make sure they're not wobbling. If they're making a clunk clunk sound moving back and forth here, that means that the bearings or, you know, the axles are loose, and you might need to be like a really big problem, something that you might not be able to handle. It'll require taking apart all the insides of the guts of the wheel. Yeah, make sure rims are spinning. You can true these wheels up if they're, you know, wobbling a bit and it's making the brakes not work right or whatever. You can pull them back in place using these little keys, and there is a special tool. Maybe I'll get into another video on that, a bonus video. Yeah, that way you know your rims are gonna center on your brakes properly, your tires are inflated, and that's really the basics of the wheels. So let's go ahead and move on to, we'll go to brakes, gears, then lube, so I don't get dirty. So this is a V-brake style. There are several different styles of brakes, but most bikes have these days because they're cheap, easy, and they work. Even with you know, the fact that all this steel probably cost them $1. Make sure that you know, you actually have some tread on the brake pads themselves, but all you need is an Allen key, and you can adjust these brakes and put them where you want. Comme ça. You just got to squeeze from both sides, and then just make them snug enough that they're hitting the right spot every time you squeeze. And then once we have the brakes working and the cable working, we'll put the brakes on and actually tighten this. Well, we'll go ahead and tighten it now, but that's a good way to do it. So we've gone ahead and got the brakes all set up properly. Just to go over quickly, we got our pads uniformed to the inside of the rim. There's ample room between both sides of the between the pad and the rim, so the rim spins freely. See, spins very freely. Quick note, by tightening these screws on either side, you actually end up putting more tension and pulling the brake away from the rim. So if you've got one side kind of hitting the rim as it spins, then go to that side and tighten the screw, and you can go to the opposite side and loosen the screw and fine-tune them until the brake sits perfectly in a resting rate. As well as if you don't have lots of tension on either side, if the brakes are kind of just being lazy, you might have to tighten up these screws on either side to pop them out. Yeah, that's the way this should work. And don't be afraid to put some WD-40 in the ends of these, because they do get rusty. They're just steel braided cables, and you know, if you use the bike a lot, they can get gummed up in here. But really, that's how it should work and return. You see, we spins freely, and the brake locks up. You see, I still have lots of room to apply the brakes gingerly, about an inch there. That's a good, well set up bike. You shouldn't have your brake handle all the way to the handlebar to get it stopped, because that way in an emergency stop you don't have any more leeway. You also don't want this too tight, obviously, because then you won't have any room to play with the brakes. Also, this here, these are on most brake levers. You can adjust the brakes out with this. So in a pinch, if let's say the cable stretches or something like that, use this, unscrew it, and then get this locking nut down, and then that way it'll stay in the right position. You can get this out about half an inch here, or maybe a quarter of an inch anyways, and get that much more room out of the play in your brakes. But this is meant to be a temporary solution. We're going to move on to gears. Now, gears are complicated, but they're not actually all that complicated as long as some general setup is still at a reasonable level. So you got your rear derailleur, your front derailleur. They're both set up fairly similarly. Basically, the only adjustments, as long as they're moving freely and they're well lubricated and your cables aren't frayed, or as long as there's some free movement in them, the only adjustment you'll need to do on the derailleurs is this nut here, and that's to release and add more tension or relieve tension from the cable if you have too much. Hopefully you don't need to even get into that. That nut's down here, on here. And again, on the rear derailleur, there's an adjustment screw to give you some on-the-go fine-tuning if you need it. This is where you should even start, because if you can adjust with just this, you're laughing. So these screws here, they basically put a stopper and make it so the chain won't fall off the top or bottom. Don't be afraid to adjust these screws if you're having that problem, but you kind of got to know how to do it, and I'll show you. But let's go ahead and spin this up. Real cheap derailleur, like this is the cheap of the cheap. So this is working fairly well because, of course, my wife barely rode the bike since we last set this up. But you see how that hesitated to come off? Well, that's where you might want to move this knob in, and that's going to relieve some tension and make the chain drop faster. And if you're having problems where the chain or will move too much, then you can add tension to that. There we go. Move down, 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 down. With these screws, there's a high and a low on them. So the low is low gear is actually the top one, oddly enough, and high gear is the bottom one, which makes all kinds of sense. But if you look inside here, I don't know if the GoPro's gonna or the Sony's gonna pick it up, but this screw is actually putting a stopper on this. So let's say the chain was falling off, you'd want to tighten this screw. That'll shove this derailleur up a little bit and keep it so the chain doesn't fall off, won't hit that point. Really, these screws shouldn't have much to do with the gears changing themselves. As long as they're within a tolerance of between here and here, the gears should change independent of how these screws are set up. All those screws are for is so the chain doesn't fall off. So as far as lubrication goes, you want to use something like fluid film or some sort of gear lubricant. You don't want to use WD-40 other than freeing stuff up. It washes off with water. So spin, allow it to spin. Oh! Get it on the chain that way. Get it on all your sprockets. Get grease in these springs. That way everything gets a little bit of grease, and you know, it'll last the summer. You want to get it on, you know, these points here, kind of that way when the cable's moving there's a little bit of grease going in the fitting here, you know, stuff like that. But of course avoid your brakes and stuff like that. But alouette, gentille alouette, alouette, gentille plumare. So, spin that wheel. It's TJ from Canadian Product Reviews. Sum things up. Bike's all adjusted. I'm going to go ahead in a bonus video and show you how to true up a wheel if it is wonky. So stay tuned for that. Click the annotation or whatever the hell's popping up here. But I want to thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. I hope this helps out people that maybe didn't know anything about bikes. I know it's fairly rudimentary stuff, but you know, I'm a little bit of an expert on fixing bikes up. If you have any questions, go ahead and, you know, leave them in the comments and I'll respond. I mean, I definitely have the time. So yeah, check that out, and thanks for watching, and I'll get to a truing the wheel video right after this. Lo and behold, I get the thing home, I clean it up, and this amazing camera turns out to work. It's clean as a whistle. Someone took amazing care of it. It comes with all of the original manuals as well as the import data sheet from 1966.